Hello, and welcome to the Media Copilot, a podcast that explores how AI is changing media. I'm Pete Paschal, longtime tech journalist and founder of the Media Copilot, and I'm excited to bring you fascinating conversations with fellow journalists, media executives, and the people building the news platforms of the future. This week, I'm psyched for a deep dive discussion with Ricky Sutton. Ricky's one of the most interesting guys in media you will ever talk to. He's had a wildly diverse career, starting as a reporter before moving on to very important roles at both media companies and tech companies. And that's enabled him to spot trends long before they were obvious to the rest of us. He also founded Oovoo, a video platform for media companies that's powered by, what else? AI. And last year, he launched his own Substack called Future Media, where he regularly shares his thoughts on how AI is changing how we consume information and how those in the media can get ahead of those trends so we're not always at the mercy of big tech. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Ricky as much as I did. If so, I'd encourage you to check out his newsletter via the link in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter, of course, if you haven't already. I'd also really appreciate it if you leave a rating or review in whatever podcast app you're in. Those really do help the show. And if you're on YouTube, liking and subscribing is a great idea too. Lastly, you can check out everything we offer at mediacopilot.ai, including AI training classes for media, marketing, and PR professionals. Okay, on with the show and my conversation with Ricky Sutton. Ricky, welcome to the Media Copilot. How are you, man?
Great to be here, mate. Good to see you again.
What time is it there in Australia? It's evening here for me.
I've just dropped the kids off at school. It's just after 9 a.m.
Wow. Okay. Well, it's just after
on
7
another
p.m.
beautiful sunny day in paradise.
Oh, nice. Yeah, you're coming up on winter there. Like it's fall for you.
Still 23 degrees, sunny. The beach is 2 minutes away. It's living the Australian dream.
Okay. Well, before this gets too casual, I want to get into everything with you, especially all the things you've been writing about lately on Future Media. But I think a lot of people listening might not be super familiar with you, and you've had a really interesting career, like really interesting. Like you've worked for both big media, big tech, you've founded your own company, and now you're focusing on AI. So give me and the listeners who might not know you a little more context on where you're coming from and specifically why you felt the need to dive much deeper into AI and how it's colliding with our world and media, the media world in particular.
Yeah, for sure. So I was a local newspaper reporter in the UK, but I wanted to be a war correspondent. That was my dream. I got to do that when I was 20, when we had the Balkan Wars in Europe. So I went to cover the wars in Bosnia and then subsequently the war in Kosovo. And so I've always been a huge believer, very, very passionate about the importance of journalism because I've seen how important it is when you see the most important events in the world erupt. And from that, I ended up being head of news of Britain's largest newspaper. So I ran the newsroom there. I was the first head of digital at News UK, so I had some experience there. I then came to Australia and decided that I wanted to understand how big tech was working. So I quit my job and took a huge pay cut and went to Microsoft to work in a joint venture it built here called 9MSN, which was part MSN, driving the traffic and the growth hacks, but it was Channel 9, a major broadcaster here, kind of your NBC.
I find that, just to interrupt for a second, funny that you went from media to big tech and took a pay cut, which it's, typically when I hear about people escaping media to a tech company, there's usually a raise involved. But yes, this was a different time. This was like the aughts, I believe, right?
It was strategic, actually. I'd already seen how big media was trying to be a tech company. And I wanted to see how a tech company was trying to be a media company, because I figured that if I could learn both sides, then I could bring tech's growth hacks back to publishing. That was what I wanted to do. So it wasn't a career decision. It was a strategic education decision. Mm-hmm. And we built lots of products there, including a really innovative product, which I write about in the Future Media Substack, called The Fix, where we used real-time data from Microsoft's products like Messenger and Hotmail and all these other products to actually help us generate a news brand. And that entertainment site became the largest entertainment site Australia's ever seen in 100 days. And it generated the same amount of advertising revenue as the whole of News Corp in Australia in 100 days.
Nice.
And so
I'm sorry, it was called The Fix? It was called The Fix?
The Fix, yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
And what it did was it basically could see the zeitgeist in real time. And so we were able to know what people cared about and write about those things exactly the moments they cared about them. It only had 5 staff. It was a rocket ship.
Wow.
But that then led to me moving over to the Bing team. Bing was launching at the time. The data that I'd shown them by bringing journalism and technology together to build the Fix led to a product in Bing called Celebrity X Rank. And so I ended up working in a search engine with no technical capability. I can't write a single line of code, but what I understood clearly was what it was for. And we helped Bing find the best journalism and send the traffic to the right places. But it also taught me AI. And that was super early. We're talking 2007. And so I then worked in AI. I spent more time learning about AI. It was always there in every decision I was making. And then, as you know, Pete, I launched a video AI company called Oovoo, which in 2014. And the logic was it could read articles, watch videos, and use AI to work out when they were related. And it would put them in the page and recommend them. But then it would then use the data of how journalists reacted and the readers reacted to validate that those were the right decisions and then optimize. And it always made sure the right video was in the right place. So for me, I've gone from a local reporter through a war zone into management, into tech, into search, into AI, into entrepreneurship, which has led me to this newsletter.
So it wasn't so much a pivot to AI when you decided to launch Future Media. It was more of a culmination of things you had been looking at and working in for really over a decade at that point.
Oh, it wasn't a pivot. It was bringing to a business what I'd learned. Because I genuinely think that, too much time is kind of spent at the moment, in my view, in newsrooms, talking about how we can use AI to make things more efficient or to maybe reduce our headcount or maybe to, auto-produce some content. That's all great. Right. That's just table stakes.
Well, I don't know if that's all great, but go on.
Yeah, but I think what I'm saying, you've written a lot about this and I share your view, but I think that it's the wrong focus. I think that's just table stakes. I think that AI is a whole new platform. And so when people talk about platforms, they talk about, we went from print, we went to digital, to the web, to the open web. Okay. And then they say we went to mobile and so forth. I don't even think mobile was necessarily a platform shift. It was just a new delivery method. I think AI is a new web. I think it's a new HTML. I think it changes everything. And so from my perspective, yes, it can make things more efficient, but it's also going to completely change the form factor in which we find and receive our news. And we can talk about that more if you'd like, but I just think it's a fundamental shift and it's a perfect time for it to happen.
Well, I would love to talk more about that. In fact, I was hoping we would build up to it, but we're kind of here already on sort of what the future looks like, where AI is a huge part of our ecosystem. So let's unpack that a bit, because I've been a little bit critical of big thoughts like the ones you've just expressed, which I've heard in various places. Usually there's a long piece someone writes about the future of AI and media or journalism, and they say a variation of what you say, that, the efficiencies are just the scraping the surface. But then when they get to this is going to change everything, it gets pretty vague. And I think that's inevitable, right? Because no one really knows what the future is, but we all know this is different. Because I think you're fundamentally right. I don't mean to criticize the idea, because I've lived through it, and not AI specifically, but I've lived through how the medium becomes the message, to steal a age-old term, through social media. So when I worked at Mashable, we were doing great journalism, but because social media in particular was a massive influence at the time on media, and that did shape a lot of that journalism. very disposable content, not just at Mashable, but at various other many publications, BuzzFeed perhaps being the most famous, became the currency of the media, the digital media web. And so in hindsight, we can see that. We can see how journalism and media were shaped by the very things that that we're distributing and consuming our content. So now we're looking at AI with that wise experience that has informed it, and we're trying to project forward. And it's hard because this is really transformative, right? And the only thing not the only thing, but the main thing I sort of zero in on as we project forward is generative search and the sort of summarization engines, as the first sort of ground level practical way that media or some version of it is consumed and then given to readers. So that's I'm sorry, I'm sort of taking over here and giving a bit of a rant, but I think it's really important context, because it's like everyone, and especially me and you as people really looking at this, wants to know what's next and what the future looks like with that. And so if I'm ever going to come around to a question here, it is what is your view of what that information ecosystem looks like? How do we project forward from where we're at now and sort of get ahead of the very valid concerns that both organizations and individual journalists have about what that future looks like?
100%. So I think the thing to focus on, because these are big issues, and so you need to find your North Star to decide how you're going to decipher this stuff, is that you need to think about two things. You need to think about discovery and you need to think about delivery. Okay, so let's talk about discovery first. So a lot of the narrative and a lot of the excitement around AI is about generative AI. But again, that's not the game that anyone's really playing, okay? Even the tech companies themselves, if you speak to them at length or if you're trying to do a deal with them, they'll ask for training data because that's what they think they're doing. But Gen AI isn't where the money is. The money is in who is going to create the future of search. That's actually what the real game in town is. So Microsoft is winning at that at the moment. So if any of your listeners use Copilot in Edge or in whatever tool they're using, then you go there and you ask Edge, hey, please tell me what the combined market cap of the top 5 media companies was on the 8th of January 2004. It will give you an answer, okay? And this is totally transformative. And so for us as media companies, we don't need to change anything. What we do is we just keep doing journalism and doing the journalism that can be trusted and that's brilliant, because it will always drive good search results. So the first thing that AI, I think, is going to transform is end the decades of Google's monopoly, number one, which is a good thing, because I've written extensively and spoken on stage a lot, and you and I have spoken a lot, about how ludicrous it was that we still had 10 blue links as our search results a year ago. And now everybody's rushing. So we can suddenly see the innovation that's been held back by Google's monopoly for the past 25 years, okay? And so AI has enabled a rapid rethink of the way that content is discovered. But at its core, the content has to be created. So for the media, we just carry on doing the really great stuff we do. You're right, our world has been perverted or the media world's view has been perverted by SEO. I need to get traffic. Yeah. But you only need traffic if you're going to sell advertising, right? And the advertising market is also owned and controlled by Google, right? And so what we've done is we've created a world where we're paying good money to SEO experts to get our content onto Google so Google can decide whether or not to sell the ad for us. It's not a workable economy. So AI enables us to sever the relationship with Google, or at least diminish the importance of the relationship with Google, and start to build new discovery methods through voice, through image, through prompts, through delivery of content to different areas, through the delivery of our content into 20 different languages automatically. All of these things enable us to get our journalists to a larger audience in a more efficient manner, but it doesn't change the core of what we do, which is creating great journalism. So that's discovery. Okay?
Yeah, let me just stop there for a second because it obviously sparks a number of questions. You seem to be implying that if AI is working well and properly, which is to say, it's surfacing the best information that responds to the prompt, that will lead naturally to, if your information is that, it will um, become not necessarily surfaced as a blue link, but it will find your audience for you almost. And
Yes, but
and
it should also link back to you still. Yeah, it's
true,
not
but
either
it's
or.
the thing is, I guess maybe I'm not sure if this is where you were going. So one, I would say there's concerns about that because um, not all AIs are necessarily pure. I wouldn't say they're. I don't even know if you could call them pure, but I mean, there's going to be business relationships on the back end of these things that may end up surfacing one particular information source over the other, favoring one over the other. But also, that said, AI is fundamentally different from search in that it's not giving you a stack of links, right? It's essentially designed to be the endpoint to a large extent, or at least a large number of users, as opposed to the thing that's the bridge.
Mm.
And this, to me, is the thing that breaks the old economy more than anything, whether it's Google or whoever is, even if theoretically Microsoft, even if it wasn't a monopoly, changing that idea of like, well, it's not just an idea. It was, in my view, a grand bargain that was de facto, which is to say, hey, internet, or hey, publishers, I'm Google, hey, publishers, let me index your content. And if I do that, I'm going to send you a ton of traffic and you can make money off it. It's like, oh, great, that sounds like a good deal. And now it's, oh, I'm going to index your content and I'm just going to give people the answer, haha, LOL. Like that seems to be where we're at. So,
Correct. So that is the second part of the D's, the delivery, right? So
there you go.
we as the news industry, you're exactly right, entered into a pact with Google where we allowed our content to be indexed in return for traffic because we were addicted to a business model that was selling advertising. And that kind of worked for about 10 years. And then it probably got a bit ugly for 5 years. It got very ugly for 4 years, and now it's disastrous, right? So that
Fair.
era is ending. Okay, so if you want to, go and have a business relationship with somebody, it doesn't necessarily have to last forever. It will have good times, and then it might end. And I think personally that the business relationship between most publishers and Google is ending now because the traffic's declining and the revenue's declining. And what's the point of having traffic if you can't sell it? And so we're seeing a changing of the guard. So the question then becomes, all right, well, we're the media industry. We are 25 years old since the search era began. We are in an AI emergence era. And now we should be smart enough now to be able to make better decisions about how our content's used, why it's used, and what we do with it. So let me throw a hypothesis past you. If you make a query on search to Copilot and you ask Copilot a question about a news event that's occurring right now, it doesn't go to the content that it crawled the web for that, okay? Because that content's 2 years old. What it does is it fires a query to Bing, gets the response from Bing, brings it back, turns it into a conversational response, and delivers it back to you in a more conversational style, okay? But it does contain the links. Yeah. You don't even have to ask it to contain the links, but I always do. I always say, give me the answers to these 5 questions and give me a link to each where I can validate it. Okay. And then it will give me the links explicitly. But it actually gives you the links anyway. Now, for me, as a search product, that feels enormously more valuable to me than the search I've been relying on with Google for so long. Now, the only reason that publishers aren't leaping into bed at 1,000,000 miles an hour with this is because Bing and Microsoft is not as big as Google. Google's market share is nigh on 90% in search, right? But if it was 50-50 with Bing or with Copilot, then people would be diving into Copilot. But where I think that we're seeing a changing of the guard, and it comes back to delivery, is that the way that we query and the responses that we get is going to change. So we're not going to type our queries into a search engine anymore. That's just not the way people work anymore. We ask our phone. I sit in my car and I have an ongoing conversation with Copilot for an hour on my commute. I'm learning things all the way to work, talking to it. So for me, the delivery of the content that we create is going to be audio and visual and delivered through entirely different methods. So .com will continue to exist, but I just think that we will receive our content atomized in lots of different ways. And you're going to ask me about monetization, and we should definitely talk about that. But I think we're going to receive it in new, reformatted ways that we are just starting to think about. So just one last thing, just on that. So a publisher rang me yesterday and said, we can't scale because we are in the local news space. We have all the local news, but we can't beat Facebook. Okay. And I said to him, why don't you just take your news, convert it into audio, and build an app for Apple CarPlay and just catch all your people on their commute? Yeah. It's just a place they'd never thought to go. But the AI tools enable them to do that almost for a minuscule cost now. And so their ability to spin up new products and find their audience and deliver their content in new and innovative ways is just starting to emerge.
Absolutely. As you were talking there, I was exactly thinking about habits, right? Because you and I, as people working in the media, like when, you were talking about people don't consume so much by typing into a search box anymore. I think to some extent they do, but I'm also biased because that's what I do when I work all day, and it's my job to read about all this stuff, and I'm constantly searching. Whereas folks who are busy, who don't work in the media, need to consume in other places, and audio is a huge one. Obviously, there's a reason why podcasts are huge, and folding an AI news-driven experience into audio form, which we've seen the New York Times and others doing, is a really smart idea. But you knew exactly where I was going, which is to say monetization. So, we talked about the discovery, the delivery, but if this transformative technology is sort of doing this with the content we're putting out there, and it's not owned and operated, and I think for most folks it won't necessarily be. You talked about the publisher who's building it, but in a lot of times it's going to be some third-party system that is adapting it with AI. What is that relationship? I mean, we're starting to see it with deals like the Axel Springer deal with OpenAI and other things like that. But is that the model going forward, that publishers need to start making deals with various AI platforms? It seems like that's the most obvious thing, but what are your thoughts on what the economy looks like, both at the organizational level and also in a way that still incentivizes good journalism?
100%. Great question. And it's also the most important question because the tech companies will tell you that news doesn't matter. We've got a situation here where Meta's just pulled out of Australia saying news doesn't matter. But you see, the funny thing is that if you look at that from Meta's perspective, I'll get straight back to your question, but for Meta, it's a fraction of 1% is news content. But that fraction of a 1% for Meta is 100% of a $4 billion media industry in Australia. That's the economics of monopoly. So when you reach a point where the monopolist says it's not important to us, but it's critically important to an entire industry, that's when governments need to step in with antitrust. So just a very shorthand piece on that, because that will come to all markets. Go and ask Canada.
Well, I would also say it's kind of they downplay the importance of news in our society when it's convenient. And when I say they, I obviously mean big tech. And we see this a lot with even OpenAI. And I feel like their position is inherently contradictory to some extent because they say, oh, the New York Times or whatever, and we can talk about that lawsuit in a few minutes. But it's always like it's a fraction of a fraction. We don't really care whether they're in it or not, except you're so hungry for training data and good training data that you hoovered it up in the first place, right? I mean, there's like, which is it? Is it important that you have good original human generated training data, which the New York Times is perhaps the epitome of, or is it this tiny thing that doesn't matter? I do feel like when big tech says things like, oh, news doesn't matter, it doesn't matter to them at a certain point in time if you only look at this very small part of the picture, but it really does. kind of matter to them. Because in
100%
Meta's sense, like, what are people even going to talk about on their platform, even if they're not sharing stories? The world still matters, and the news isn't necessarily about the world. So anyway, that's a
No,
little
you're right on
personal
all of
rant.
that. So I'm giving a big. Don't forget monetization. Come back to it, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving a
Get a
big
little
keynote.
sidetracked. Yeah.
I'm giving a big keynote. And what's critically important, and they can't be separated from the general conversation. So giving a big keynote in London and next in a fortnight. And my main narrative is to try and teach the media companies that are attending what it is that drives big tech. And so every time they come to me, if I ask them that question, they've got 100 different responses, but I can tell you what drives them. And it's one thing, and it's one thing only, and it's money. Okay. So, Google says it's a search company, but it's not. It's an advertising company. And Meta thinks it's a social company, but it's not. It's an advertising company. And why are they advertising companies? Because money's the mission. The product, okay, the thing they do is the product, but the money is the mission. Okay. And if that wasn't true, they wouldn't be spending huge amounts of money in loss-making businesses in AI unless they genuinely think that's where all the money's going. So if the media industry needs to be in the money to be able to continue to sustain itself, it has to get into AI. You can use them as a heat map for where you actually need to be paying attention. Okay. So to your point, yes, absolutely. They stole the entire internet, and that court case will be fought in every jurisdiction. And the New York Times is the canary in the coal mine on that one. And we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, they are only interested in money. So the media industry needs to think about how, if it wants to work with tech companies and it wants to be in AI going forward, it needs a business model that sustains them, but also sustains the AI company. And people don't think like that. So my logic to you is as follows. If every news company in the world decided to put its news content into a single LLM or into a single database, and made that the only location that all of the AIs could sample their content, and every publisher set their own price for access for it on a per word basis, you would have a new economy that rides up the growth. So we as the media industry need to stop thinking about what we do today and think about what we need to do tomorrow so we can be a $20 trillion company in 20 years and not sit back and wait to ride someone else's roller coaster.
That's quite a dream. So you're thinking of almost some kind of platform within or as an umbrella to the media industry that essentially becomes a standard, right, for sharing or making available, I guess, your corpus for crawling from AI. Is that kind of what you're suggesting?
Yeah, but only for search. I don't think there's any justifiable reason to sell your content for training. I haven't yet seen a model that says that training is a good idea for any publisher. In my view, my advice to any publisher that asks me is not to sell for training. Let's wait and see what that economy becomes. We don't need to do that. But we do need to start to think about how our content is controlled and paid for when it's used for search.
And that seems like because it's a one and done kind of thing. Like your information's trained, and then you can't really untrain. I guess you could sort of block it in a future update, but
if you were trying to put a price on all the content on the internet ever produced by every professional person in the world, that's the price of the internet, but they've paid nothing. So when the New York Times is asked for training data and it's asked to sell the entire corpus of everything written under the New York Times' brand ever, going back to the beginning of time, what number would you put on that? I mean, my number would be, I don't know, $20 trillion, and we'll renegotiate again in 5 years. Yeah, there is no value that makes it make sense to allow your entire brand to be sold holus bolus once to be anonymized by somebody else. It's like taking all the world's diamonds, crushing them up, putting them into cement, and making it into a tower block. It makes no sense at all.
I like the analogy. So let's talk a little bit about that lawsuit. And you mentioned that maybe the AI companies or OpenAI in particular, will get sued in every jurisdiction. I'm a little suspect of that because I do feel like if there was a massive class action, or whether it's class action or just everybody coming out to sue them, I think it would have happened already. Now, a few publishers, it should be noted, have joined in. It's not just the New York Times. But I also feel like a lot of these folks are playing it safe, essentially, and have decided, oh, the New York Times is taking up the fight. Now I don't have to. And I can just stand back and watch, and I can benefit from the ruling if it's in favor of the Times, or if it isn't, then I won't be put in the corner, basically made to sit at the kids' table when it comes time to bargain with OpenAI and other sort of big fish in the AI space. That's kind of my general cynical feeling about what's going on. Do you feel the same? And if you do or you don't, what do you think that's going to change at all between now and when there might be a ruling?
Mm. So the New York Times court case is enormously important, but it's only one court case, and it's only in one jurisdiction, and it's only on one interpretation of the law. Okay, so the thing to always remember is this is a fight over fair use, which is a uniquely US interpretation of copyright law and doesn't exist in any other country in the world. Okay, so even if OpenAI wins that court case comprehensively, it has no bearing at all on what would happen in Europe or in Asia or in Africa. And if you look at a company like Microsoft, 50% of Microsoft's earnings are outside the States. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, that the Microsoft wins this comprehensively in the US, okay? Then they can build a Copilot for America, but that Copilot can't go to America without legal jeopardy, or can't go to Europe without legal jeopardy. So we are in a really messy state. The second thing is that let's say it goes the other way. Let's say that the New York Times wins the court case against Copilot, okay? Because it's really about Copilot. OpenAI feeds Microsoft that feeds Copilot. So it's really Copilot. Let's say the New York Times comprehensively wins. Then every publisher in the world will then join the class action then. They don't need to spend money on lawyers now on what might or might not win. What they want to do is someone else to win the case for them, and then they'll come in behind it. So there's a really interesting jeopardy here for Microsoft and OpenAI, which I think doesn't get enough coverage, which is that if Microsoft wins, it only wins in America, but if it loses globally. So I think that the weight of losing far outweighs the benefit of winning. And if I was on the Microsoft board, I'd be sitting down, and the very first question I'd be asking the CEO and the executive is, this feels like it could wipe out Copilot, which is probably $1 trillion worth of value on our current stock price. Surely there has to be something that costs less than $1 trillion that we can do that can help it go away. I think that is the trading position that the world's media is in. So coming back to the point of the logic I gave you earlier on about all the publishers working together as a coalition to trade with the AI future, if all the publishers coalesced in a single platform to distribute their content with permission to the AIs, then the AIs could buy from that one platform at one price all of the content they need without any legal jeopardy, and it will be considerably less than $1 trillion. So the sensible thing for the future, and to reduce the reliance on advertising for publishers, and to drive the next era of monetization, is to transform the way news content is traded to these AIs into a pay-as-you-go model. A query somebody asks, please tell me what happened in Gaza yesterday. That query doesn't go to the open web anymore. That query goes to a new product that these publishers have generated. The query is made there, and a payment is paid for whoever's content is found. It becomes a one-for-one pay-as-you-go model, which reduces the reliance on advertising and reduces the reliance on Google. I think that once that content's found, it can be delivered in any method. But for the publisher is paid whether it is returned to the consumer in audio, whether it's returned in a video, whether it's returned in a version of Gen AI. Each and every single time the publisher is paid, and the AI companies remove the legal jeopardy.
I love it. All we have to do is build an entirely new platform and get all the publishers of the world to cooperate and use it.
This is easy though, Pete, right? It sounds really complicated, but you're just talking about building a giant LLM. So if you created a giant large language model and just invited publishers to add APIs to it voluntarily and set pricing in it, that's all it requires. And then if people join, then great. And if they don't join and their content's scraped off the open web, well, that's kind of your fault, right? You've got an opportunity to be paid, and if you haven't, then that's up to you. But it feels like a way that everybody can win.
Yeah, and I don't mean to mock the idea at all. I think it's brilliant. I'm more just less optimistic than you, perhaps, of the idea of publishers cooperating or agreeing on anything. Maybe that's just my cynical New York media
Well, okay,
mindedness, but
let's talk about that a little bit, if it's
yeah,
okay with
sure,
you. So,
absolutely.
one thing that all the news media companies would agree with, okay, is that they don't make enough money. Do we know any
Oh,
that don't think that's the case?
I would say the agreement there would be about 100%.
Right. So that's the
My estimate.
narrative that needs to be told, which is, do you think the tech companies are taking all your content? Yes. Do you think you're not making enough money? Yes. Do you want the tech companies to pay you? Yes. Okay. Ergo, let's do this. So I just think that I actually don't think the no is going to come from the media companies. I think the no will come from the tech companies because they want to wait and see what happens with the New York Times. But if they start to get the chill that the New York Times might not win, and we could talk about that court case in detail if you like, but there's no case law that decides this. This is decided by a judge on the day, on a whim, right? So
Right.
we've literally got $12 trillion of market cap in big tech companies, of which probably 3 or 4 trillion today is probably directly related to AI, that is based on a technology that's unproven, a court case that's undecided, based on a law that's opaque, okay, that impacts $4 trillion worth of value. It's the largest decision commercially in human history, and it's hardly getting any coverage. So I think it's absolutely fascinating. But to go back to the core of what we do as journalists, right? Just write the news. That's all you need to do. And all of us, will work together to try and find a way to get that found, discovered, paid for, and delivered in a way that sustains the industry going forward. But we just have to keep doing the news brilliantly.
Absolutely. Let's switch tracks for a second here because we've talked a lot about OpenAI and Microsoft, and I know this is kind of becoming the big tech podcast. But I really want to get your take on Apple, and I know you've been writing about them a decent amount lately because there's just been a lot of news, or at least rumors going around, credible rumors about what they're doing in the AI space. Now, whether they're putting Google on iPhones, I know there was a story about Google Gemini, and we can unpack that a bit. But I'm more interested just broadly Apple's role here, right? So it's pretty clear they were caught a bit flat-footed by the whole AI revolution. Apple doesn't rush things out; they like to make them good or better or their own flavor, and they tend to do pretty good at that. They tend to, when they come out with something, it's well thought out and does stuff better than before. The Vision Pro may be the exception to that, but let's put that aside again as well and think about what an AI powered iPhone or Siri or whatever, when that comes out, what is your take on what that might look like? But more importantly, how is that going to change the playing field?
So I wrote a piece about this the other day. So I likened Tim Cook to the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. Because in the start of The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man is found by Dorothy and he's rusty. And he's a great guy, but he's rusty and he can't move, right? And he's just stuck and he's become, he just doesn't work anymore. That is exactly Apple. So to your point, we've all got this kind of marketing afterglow that tells us that they've always got something truly astonishing sitting behind one of those doors in one of those secret labs. But that hasn't been true since Steve Jobs died. So without being too harsh about it, they haven't done a single thing that's exciting since then. So we've got the iPhone, but that was Jobs. And the iPhone has updated itself with data changes and updates to iOS. But show me one thing that's been truly revolutionary. They've added payments to phones, but yeah, sure, everybody was going to do that, right? There's nothing here that's really stopped you in your tracks and just gone, oh my goodness me, look at that phone. Oh, I watched the BlackBerry movie the other day when they saw the iPhone for the first time. It's like, that's how I felt. It was like, goodness me. And then the iPod, goodness me, right? All of these things just absolutely stopped you in your tracks when they arrived. Nothing has happened on Tim Cook's watch at all. Okay. And so we are not seeing massive innovation. What we're seeing is massive wealth, monopoly. And we need to see from Apple something new. Now, for me, The thing that could have been the wow moment was when Siri, when I'm driving in my car and I say, hey, Siri, please tell me the whole history of Joan of Arc. And what it does is it says, here are some links I've got for you, which I can't use in the car. Or the response is, sorry, I can't answer that for you in the car. That is unacceptable. They should have solved Siri. They were in the lead with Siri when they launched Siri and did absolutely nothing with it. Siri should have been Copilot before Copilot. And now when I hear from Apple, and everything I have is Apple, right? All of my products are Apple because of the privacy promise that has been given to me by Apple. If they're now going to move to Google for their AI, I'm leaving Apple. All of my devices are going in the bottom drawer and never being used again. So where do they sit in the ecosystem? They are losing ground hand over fist, and they just look like the Tin Man.
And even if they have a AI powered Siri around the corner, say it does become the Copilot that you allude to and maybe wish it was, and that happens either this year or soon, do you think that turns things around for them once people can, not just you, I know you talk to your AI all the time through your phone, but I think you'd agree you're more the exception than the rule right now. But once it is built into the phone, do you see that changing?
Yeah, well, it could. It depends on how good it is, and it depends on how much it's reliant on Gemini, on Google's Gemini. If they've bought more AI companies than anybody else, Apple, in the last 3 years.
Well, they have the money.
But they've done almost nothing with them. So there must be something going on in the background. Yeah. You remember Apple did have massive projects that were going to change the world. There was going to be an Apple TV, if you remember.
Oh, I remember. I wrote about it a lot.
The television to go on the wall, right? There was going to be an Apple car, which they've just parked forever, right? And so the chances were there, but they've not taken them, which again shows me that they've stalled because they were, for nearly a decade, the world's most valuable company. And really, the best innovation tends to come from people who really feel the need to be better tomorrow than they are today. And if you're already leading from the front, you don't feel that. That's why sports teams get to the top of the league and then fall back, right? You have to feel the hunger of catching the person in front. So Apple's decline isn't a disaster for anyone. It's actually probably a net benefit for consumers. For me, the big question is absolutely Siri needs to be an assistant. And when I ask it to do something in the car, the answer isn't you're driving. The answer is absolutely, let me give that to you right now. That is the job of the product, right? And it's entirely possible today, right? So that's what it needs to do. It needs to leap forward from its stance. And my big question is can it? I just don't know if it's become so static that it's lost its momentum.
Yeah, and one of the things that you tend to get when you are that big and in the lead, as you say, is very risk averse. And my view is that even if Apple puts an AI in the iPhone, which they'll do in some limited way, but that's what I mean. It's going to be limited because Apple and putting something that can hallucinate and potentially give people wrong answers, which is inherent to LLMs today, as good as they're getting and as much as they can filter that out in some ways, AIs are far from perfect still. And there's a lot of caveats and a lot of disclaimers and a lot of stuff that goes hand in hand with services attached to them. And I really just can't see a full-on LLM on the iPhone giving answers that, you can imagine the next day, as soon as it's released or within hours, people sharing all the weird stuff, even if it's a fraction of 1%. The minute it has its Gemini moment, and infamously Gemini had the imagery of historical figures. We don't have to go over it, but the Asian Nazis or whatever it was calling up when you asked for that sort of stuff was just crazy, and they were held over the fire for it. Apple is not going to put up with that, but that means they're not going to put out something that's truly transformative either. So,
but they could though. They could thread the needle. So let's say that you decided to take Apple News and Apple CarPlay, okay, and then you or I say that I'm a subscriber to these 20 news brands, and I like my news from here, 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 and here. Let's use Siri to be able to tell me what the news is, okay, in a generative execution, in an AI generative execution. But it only pulls the content from those publishers, and it only pulls it from that box that I was talking about earlier on. Because then you know it's true, because then you know it's real, because then you know it can be relied upon. So this argument, there is a broken economics and a failure of vision from the tech guys. They've got used to being able to have everything for free, and as a result, they can report 40% market share or 40% profit growth quarter on quarter on quarter on quarter, and everyone's addicted to that. But that was never real economics. That was economics of boom and bust. That was the economics of monopoly and its ending. And so they are going to have to pay if they want to build the best products in the world. You can't just take it anymore. But we as the media industry, that's not their failing. That's what they've got used to. What we've got used to is being the victim of that. The person that needs to step up from here is us. We need to step up as an industry and say, we'll lead this discussion. We have a big idea. This is the way we're going to do it. And we're going to give it to you and we're going to make it work. And we should do that. And, I think we've been a taker, not a giver. And I think we need to step up into the role of giving real good ideas that actually help somebody like Apple solve the problem they've got. They've got a massive problem, right? They're losing market share all over the world. Their products don't look exciting. They've stopped being the most valuable company in the world, right? Maybe we could step up and solve a problem for them. That would be worth $200, $300 billion for them, right? So I just think that we as an industry think too much about how we fit into their world when they're not perfect. And we're starting to see that. So we need to think like they think. How do we solve the problems they've got? Because we're just as smart as they are.
Too much defense, not enough offense. I couldn't agree more. That's a great place. I would love to leave it there because it's such a positive note. But I would also like to take all the big picture stuff we've talked about and try to distill it down a little bit to the ground level. And I would love to ask for your advice, and rather the advice you would give people working in the industry today, not just media executives, but journalists, editors, people just fearing for the future of this industry and their own livelihoods in the wake of this thing we call AI. And what is your advice for them? How should they think about it? What should people in the media industry today know about AI, or at least how should they regard it, in your view, to survive this uncertain future?
The first thing is the message I've given all along is just keep doing great journalism, because that's the bedrock of everything we do. It's the foundation. It doesn't matter what house you build, you have to have a foundation, and foundation is great journalism. Whether you're local, you're national, you're international, doesn't matter. And I've been all of those. And so just do a great job in the job you're in, the best job you can, and keep creating great journalism. Because I honestly believe that in the end, this will turn out to be the most important product that drives the future. The AIs can't work without it. And look, let me tell you this, right? Because I sometimes talk about this when I'm talking to students. When people first started to communicate around a campfire, millions of years ago, I'm going to get my numbers wrong. I'm not going to know the exact numbers. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, we literally looked at the stars and asked why. And we're still doing exactly the same thing today. And that will never change for as long as there are people. And it's our job as journalism to answer those questions. The format in which it's discovered and the format in which it's delivered will change over time, as it always was. We've gone from papyrus to paper to digital to AI, and there'll be something else. But I don't think you need to worry about that. There are people working on that all the time, and we will find a way to navigate it. We've done a terrible job for you as leaders for the last 20 years, for which I apologize. But now we know a ton more about it, and now we'll fix it. But all we need to happen is for you guys to keep laying down the brilliant foundations of information so that my kids and our kids' kids can all make sure that we know what's going on in the world around us.
Nice. Ricky Sutton, it has been more than real. Thank you so much for all the time, the sage advice, and your perspective.
Pleasure, Pete. Thanks, man.
Where can people find you, sir, if they're looking for you on the internets?
Yeah, so I write the Future Media newsletter on Substack. So you can come and subscribe there. We'd love to have you along. There's a couple of thousand media executives in there that would enjoy you being along for the ride. I'm on LinkedIn. You can always find me and message me there if you choose. But I'm usually around. I'm not hard to find. So just drop me a line.
Amazing. Thank you, sir. Let's do it again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Ricky. You can check out his newsletter, Future Media, at rickysutton.substack.com. And if you like what you heard, please take just a minute to leave a rating or review for the Media Copilot in your podcast app. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and check out mediacopilot.ai for our classes on AI for journalists, marketers, and content creators. Seeing you in the future.